Good morning.
Morning.
Please feel free to move a bit if it's easier to see. Thank you, everyone who helped make last week's ordinations work. People who sewed robes, people who received robes, people who set up, people who stuck it through. It was quite a long set of rituals, I know, but really central and important rituals to our tradition, and such a joyous occasion for the community and such a joyous occasion for me personally to have these relationships that flourish and then come to a pivotal place where a person's foot on the path can be recognized in clear ways, ancient ways. I'd like to talk this morning a bit about the mountain seat, approaching the mountain, Shinzan. In 3 weeks' time, there will be a very important set of rituals again that happen here at Buddha-ai Temple, known as the mountain seat. And the conventional way of talking about this is an installation of an abbot. So if you look up in the dictionary, well, probably not in the English dictionary, but in Japanese dictionary, what does Shinzan mean? It will say a new resident priest is being installed in a temple. That's what Shinzan is, or Shinzanshiki, or ascending the mountain. And that's really true. That's what it means. But it's something that we should think about, something that we should contemplate as a community, what the significance of this moment is. I'm certainly considering that, pontificating on it. It's a big moment for me, much like when I received ordination from my teacher, Keira Joshin Roshi, or when I was honored to succeed to his Dharma. It's like that kind of thing. It's that kind of scale in the life of a practitioner. And it's been a long time coming. You know, when I returned from Japan in the late 90s, I had a strong, youthful, ideal and inspiration to establish a temple. I'm so thankful for having that heart. You know, it was completely naive and wrong about almost everything. But I had a vow. A deep, deluded, inspired vow. And so what I thought may take a few years has been 20. It's a little bit of a sidetrack, but you know how there's cat years? I think there's like cat years, human years. I think it also gauges with your age. Like there's your 20, how many years is it in your 20s, or how many years is it in your 30s, or how many years is it in your 50s or 40s, you know, like that. So actually, now that I'm in my 50s, I think I was right. It only took a couple years. 20. You know, we had to establish a temple, first of all. You know, we sat many places around Eugene. I was so blessed to come into the arms of a community that had already begun to form, and there are several of you among the assembly today who were the first people that I met when I returned and started to sit at Getchen Brox's house on Potter Street. What fortune to have such a ridiculous idea and to be met by sincere hearts that were already paving the way. There was already Dharma flourishing in Oregon. Dharma Rain Zen Center with Kyogen Carlson Roshi and Gyokuko Carlson Roshi, some of the great pioneers of the Dharma in the Northwest. Or I would say the great pioneers. Chozen Beis Roshi and Hogen Beis Roshi. The four of those teachers also met me very squarely. And they listened to my ridiculous dream. And they said, of course, we have such a dream. Yeah. And so they could hear it as the group that was here in Eugene sitting could also hear it. And so it took many years to build something stable. Build may be the wrong word, to let something firm up. Right? To keep practicing freshly and diligently. Right? And not to try to make something too intentionally, but to weave together the hearts and the resources that there could be the emergence of a temple. We would say the emergence of a mountain. Somewhere along the way, it seemed like it was probably time to have a mountain seat ceremony to become the abbot. And at that time, my teacher was stubbornly holding on to the abbotship of his temple, Shurinji. I can say that now because he can't hear me. Well, maybe he is hearing me. But he remained abbot for a very long time. And many of us thought it would be good if he turned it over to my older Dharma brother, Koshin. Not because he didn't have any spunk left in him, but it seemed like Koshin's spunk needed to do something. And it seemed like it was a good time for him. So there was always a little chatting behind the scenes, and my Dharma brother would hush me and say, it's not our place to have such an opinion, and that didn't sway my American heart. And in that time, I made a pledge to my Dharma brother. I said, I will not take the Dharma seat, I will not take the mountain seat until you take the mountain seat first. It seemed impossible to me that I would become the abbot of a temple before my older Dharma brother, who had been so kind and helped me in so many ways. He's 12 years my senior by birth, and I don't know, at least a couple decades my senior by ordination. And he was so plainly kind, has been so plainly kind to me for so long. I just didn't feel like I could do that. And so I said that to him. And he kind of laughed. But I held to it. But it still wasn't changing. And it seemed like I should go ahead. And so we planned the first mountain seat ceremony. We started to plan it. And things got messed up. And so it turned out that my Dharma brother Koshin did have his mountain seat ceremony in 2016 in the fall. And I was so happy to be able to attend, not as the abbot of another temple, but as his younger Dharma brother. In all of that mishmash, we planned the mountain seat for 2017, the spring of 2000. The late spring of 2017. And this was the year that our beloved daughter Satsuki was diagnosed with leukemia and died later that year. Many of you saw me and my family through that time with deep kindness and generosity. We have a tissue in here somewhere. There it is. And it wasn't time. And then it was planned again. And that same year that Satsuki became sick, my Dharma brother Koshin became extremely ill with a kind of mysterious disease that I still don't understand. I've looked it up in English a bunch of times, but it only comes out in Latin, and I don't understand what it is. But he came close to death many times, has come close to death many times since then. Oftentimes has to be in the hospital. And so he said, if you wait until the fall of 2020, I'm going to be through with a series of treatments, and I think I might be able to go. If I'm able to go, that will be the time. So we planned for fall of 2020, last year. Yeah. And so it's come to this, 2021. As we were making final decisions about the time, the planning, I said, no matter what happens, this is not a very safe thing to say, okay? So I don't encourage you to say it unless you've been through something like the list that I'm just talking about. As long as there's only a couple people who have to be here to make it legitimate in the eyes of the Sodo school. One of them is Akiba Gengo Roshi, who is the Bishop of North America in the Sodo school from the Japanese organization. I've asked him to be the Seido, which is an important position. So he needs to be here. I got to be here. And the head monk Genjo has to be here. And then there needs to be a spattering of other people. But it could be very, very small. And then it will still count, right? At least on the record books. So I said, as long as we can get those people here, we're going to do it, no matter what. And so we're plunging in among COVID and all of the complexities of that. Over the past year and a half, we've weaved a way for the community to stay connected even among this time. And so I feel very good about being able to continue with the ceremony, even though it won't be quite as rambunctious as it would have been if all of my pals from around the world and larger numbers of people from the community were able to come together. I'm sure it will still be quite a thing. This does truly feel to me like the right time. Typically, it would have been much sooner, but we had many things to contend with. Not least of all is building a temple, caring for a community, and raising an abbot. It's why I feel so indebted to this community, that I have been raised by this community to take this seat. In very specific ways with each of you. We've contributed to whatever capacity I have to be a guide in this way. So in a practical sense, what does it mean, the mountain seat? The mountain seat is an English translation. In the Chinese, it means something more like ascending the mountain or going forward to the mountain. I think the reason that people maybe translated it as mountain seat is one of the central ceremonies is where the new abbot takes their place on the altar and receives questions from the community. Now, this is a very traditional thing. In Zen temples in ancient times, in the Dharma hall, there was no images on the altar. There was simply a platform. And there was another hall called the Buddha hall, and there would be a statue of the Buddha and various bodhisattvas, etc., in the Buddha hall. But in the Dharma hall, nothing on the altar. And periodically, the abbot would come to the Dharma hall and ascend the platform. They would sit or stand on the altar, and they would deliver their teachings there from the altar. It's common now in the mountain seat ceremony to stand, right? So we would call it a mountain seat. It's standing, standing on the seat. I think that's why people translated it as mountain seat. It's one of the ceremonies, but not the only one. And this is the most classic way for a teacher to present their Dharma. It's only done at this time and a few other very rare occasions where an abbot would give teaching from the altar. So in a practical sense, the ceremonies will be the first time that I do that. Maybe the only time I ever do that. And that is to, a little like a wedding, when you stand up in front of everyone and you say, I do, and you put a ring on. It's like you pass through a gate. The mountain and the new abbot are no longer separable. Along with me entering the abbotship, and more fundamental, even more important, is the establishment of the office of the abbot. We've had a temple for a long time with a resident priest. That's been me. But we haven't had an abbot. Now there's things that an abbot might do that you haven't seen yet. Some of them are really simple. Because I'm kind of a stern type person, there's a bunch of things that I didn't do, because only abbots are supposed to do them. Like, wear a robe that's not black. Pretty simple. But usually, all the kind of rituals and things that we're having, a Buddha's birthday or an ordination or things like that, an abbot would wear a different colored robe. Who cares, really, But it does carry something, right? It does have some meaning in the community, it has some meaning in the larger community and within the temple. Those things, I think, are only important in that they point to some more central posture of heart, which an abbot has to take. And that is why waiting for the Shinzanshiki this long has been so important. Not about some of the physical trappings, but because of my own readiness, my own solidity of Dharma, my own solidity of my place, to be able to meet you from there. I feel like in the past many years, I've often been too wishy-washy. I know some of you probably don't feel that way. But this is all connected for me. I think my most senior student once called me a cream puff. But this office of the abbot is a way in which a community holds a certain person in this office, and it's very important for the community. Right? Why is it important? Well, one of the reasons is because caring for a living tradition takes living the tradition. Okay? Caring for a living tradition takes living the tradition. So we're very lucky to have encountered a living tradition, a tradition which is not just full of a set of dogmas, right? Or do these things and then you'll be okay. You'll get into this nirvana or this heaven or whatever the final solution will be. Simply follow the protocol, right? A living tradition meets us and we meet it. Our life is invited into a tradition. It doesn't mean the tradition doesn't have demands. The tradition definitely has demands, right? But it's about the coming together of our lives, of the living vibrancy of our own heart, reflected through the lives of the ancestors, in which the opportunity for practice emerges. So this is what an abbot is charged with doing. With living the tradition. We're all charged with that. But within the mandala of a community, an abbot sits as a place to be the root of that for the community. Again, in a traditional Zen temple, there's a Buddha hall, there's a Dharma hall, there's a monk's hall, there's an administrative and kitchen hall, and there's a mountain gate. And then in the very heart of the complex, actually the very back of the complex, right in the center, in a place that's usually a little bit labyrinthy to get to, there's what's referred to as the kaisando, or the opener of the mountains hall. It's the hall of the founding abbot. For a Zen temple, actually, that's all you have to have. You could do without a Buddha hall, you could do without a Dharma hall, you could do without a monk's hall, you could do without the other hall. It's the living tradition that comes through that hall, which becomes the beating heart of the temple. When I practiced at Daijoji Monastery, you were not allowed to go into this hall unless you were one of two people. You were the abbot, or you the person that was there to make the tea offerings. That was the only reason. And we had a monk who was, he wasn't a monk yet. He was there in the hopes of becoming a monk. And he was so kind of shameful about receiving a stipend each month. I'm not sure why. He had a big trip about that. He had hidden the money behind the founding abbot's plaque in the founder's hall. And someone took it. So it was this big scandal. And they went to the abbot and they were like, he was like, someone took the money, I was putting it there because I wasn't a monk and I didn't know I was receiving it, blah, 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 blah. And the abbot was like, what are you doing in the kaisando? He wouldn't even hear of the money. The money was completely like, he would not have any discussion about it at all. It was like, no, I don't want to even hear about it. There was no money. There's no such thing as money in the kaisando. There may be slips of paper, but it has nothing to do with this. So it was one of the things that impressed me of the importance of that place. Right? Now, is that about the person who opened the mountain? Of course it is. Right? Does it mean they're perfect? No. Does it mean we have to idealize them and not question anything that they said? No. But it means that they were living the tradition, and we have received that tradition through them. That temple has received that tradition through them. And so when we open up the office of the abbot, that is an office which goes generation after generation. That office is an office that cares for the mountain. And so it becomes the responsibility of the abbot to see the lively continuation of the living tradition, not just the continuation of the tradition, right? Not just carrying things out rotely, but the liveliness to put their own life into the tradition so that others can also meet that gate. That's what it means for the abbot and the mountain to not be two. Really, not even to be one. And so there's a way we can hear all of this and as a very practical kind of quality. How do we keep a tradition going? Right? And we need to recognize certain people as having a place in that. Right? Abbot is one of them. A head monk is one of them. Kojiar, one of them. Everybody in an assembly are them. Our neighbors are them. The northern flickers that have been leaving some very beautiful feathers in the yard are some of them. But there's something more primary to this. Because temples do wax and wane. We've worked very hard, and through the generosity of many, many people, we've come to a place where we can enjoy assemblies like this here at the humble crossroads of 22nd and Garfield. And the temple is vibrant. There's a lot to do. I'm really excited. But in 100 years or 200 years, there'll come a time when things are dusty. That's how it is. And especially that's why the office of the abbotship is important, and why we've done the work to establish the stability, to catch fire when there is a spark. If you think of all we had to do to create the fire here in Eugene, all of the kind of work to establish a temple, now we have a shrine which can catch that spark. And of course it will wax and wane. But to be able to catch that spark, that's essentially the activity of the temple all the time. The invitation of the mountain gate, the invitation to the mountain, is an invitation to our own liveliness, each one of us. We're accountable to the mountain that is beyond seeing, it's beyond knowing, it's beyond planning out, it's even beyond caring for. The Buddha Shakyamuni in the Lotus Sutra said, "I dwell on sacred Vulture Peak and every other dwelling place." That's like my favorite line of the Lotus Sutra, maybe all sutras. We chant that every day, verse of the lifespan. I dwell on sacred Vulture Peak and every other dwelling place. Sacred Vulture Peak is the holy mountain, the sacred mountain from which the Buddha taught. He taught many things, the Lotus Sutra included. This is not just a normal mountain. You can go, in India, you can go to Vulture Peak now. And I haven't been there, I hope to go someday. And there's a little shelf on the side of a mountain, right? And from the people I know who have been there, they say, you know that assembly from the Lotus Sutra, which was like hundreds and billions of beings? No way it could have fit, right, on that little shelf, right? But see, that's the point. We're not talking about the conventional mountain. Of course, Shakyamuni Buddha did sit there and deliver sermons. But with the fleshy eye, we could only see the limited number of beings that were there in some kind of geographical way, some kind of human-centered way of thinking about it. But the Lotus Sutra tells us that there were an incalculable host of beings that were present. Because that mountain that we're talking about is not just the physical mountain. It's not just the practical mountain. It's this sacred mountain that is dwelling in each place. It's not everything is one, right? It's not that all is the mountain. It's that each place is the mountain where awakening dwells. So the question of the temple, the power of the temple, what it is that the abbot is called out to care for or to live out, is the gate of the intimate mountain. What is the gateway to this mountain from which the Buddha preaches? That's what an abbot is pledging to uncover through their life and through the life of the community. Now, this has some real practical implications, and I want to reflect this back to the practicality and then tell you a little story, and then I promise I'll stop. There are deep practical implications for how a temple is in the world, how it is in a community, how it shows up as a thing interrelated with other things. When we think about it in terms of this mountain, this ineffable sacred mountain. When I think about this, I think of this story about Suzuki Roshi, who is the founder and the abbot of San Francisco Zen Center, one of the early pioneers of Soto Zen in North America. And as his community was gathering together there at Page Street, some of you maybe have been there before, it was, the 60s, and everyone was trying to figure out how to make this work. how to make community work. And there was a lot of this coming together and living as a community. And that meshed very well with the Buddhist tradition and Buddhist ideals. And everyone was coming together, and they had this big problem. They were like, we need some money because we have to do things like buy food. And I think people's needs were pretty simple, but they were trying practically how to deal with this. And so one of the students had brought forth this idea. They said, we all read a lot. Surprise, surprise, Zen folks. And so we're buying all these books from these bookstores. We could start a bookstore here at the temple. And then if we had a bookstore here, we could make some money off the books that we're selling. And then also we could get the kind of books that we want to read. Way before Amazon, right? So they had this great idea, and they took it to Suzuki Roshi. And the account of this that I read, Suzuki Roshi was furious. He was like, what are the bookstores supposed to do? What are the bookstores supposed to do? If we're really focused on this mountain, on what this mountain gate is, we will not try to pull everything into the gates of the temple and to make it into Buddhism. We won't march out from the gates and try to convert everybody or try to make the world be the form that we think that it should be. There are real practical implications for how it is that we practice together and how we conduct ourselves as a community when we think in this way. They have a bookstore now at San Francisco. I have hesitated every time I go to ask. I say, that time Suzuki Roshi got really mad about, what was the turning point where people said, okay, maybe this would be okay? I could tell you one of the possibilities is the death of the abbot, or them stepping aside. In Suzuki Roshi's case, the two came very close together. I know that when my teacher stepped aside as the abbot of a Shurinji temple, there was all these old posters in the main hall. He just loves stuff. He just put it up and just leave it there for decades. And more candles the better, and more incense the better, and just the more the better. That's his kind of his. And my Dharma brother, who's also his son, who grew up with that and is very much more kind of Zen about those things, just drove him crazy. So as soon as my Dharma brother was abbot, stuff started to disappear. And now it's a much more Zen temple inside a Shurinji. I get a little lonely now when I go, but that changes. So maybe that was the shift. Fine, the new abbot, living tradition, not holding on to the words of Suzuki Roshi, but finding their way forward. Real implications. These temples oftentimes were built on the sides of mountains, not on the top. Let's think about that for a second. They're built on the foothills or on the sides, not on the top. And at the top, if you go to the top of a mountain behind a temple in Japan, you will always find a shrine to the mountain gods. Let that sit in your heart and your mind. What does that teach us about the posture of our activity, our temple activity, in relationship to the mountain? It's not just worshiping the earth. Something much more profound. It's not just that we can't get by without the earth. It's that the earth is the mountain. The concrete reality of our lives is the realm of awakening. Now I'll tell you a story and then I'll stop. My apologies to those who are here from retreat. You've heard this story a few times already, but it's good. You have to hear it a lot of times develop a relationship with it. This is a story about Nagarjuna and his student Kanadeva. Nagarjuna was, or is, one of the most important ancestors, oftentimes referred to as the second Buddha. And he's a very interesting character. Naga is like a dragon lord, or a dragon being, a serpent being. And he was named after them. Actually, before he was a student of his teacher, he dwelt in a mysterious place deep in the mountains, as said, underneath a tree, a naga tree. And he taught 500 nagas the Dharma there, and also received the teachings from them. It said that he could travel into the depths of the ocean and down into the earth where these beings dwell, and where the countless sutras of past Buddhas were kept. And as he became a person of the way, he became someone who brought those up and out into the world. So he's named after that, Nagarjuna. In Chinese, it means dragon tree or naga tree. In the Sanskrit, Nagarjuna, Arjuna means like hero. Arjuna is the great hero of the Bhagavad Gita, for example. Right? So Naga Arjuna is like the great hero of the serpent. And so Nagarjuna is there on the mountain, the Naga mountain, with his students. And Kanadeva comes to visit him. And Nagarjuna knows he's coming. And so he has one of his assistants, one of his students, take a bowl and fill it completely to the top with clear water. And he places it in front of the gate. Kanadeva arrives at the mountain gate. He sees the bowl of clear water, and he removes a needle from his robes, and he places it in the water. And then he ascends directly to the seat of Nagarjuna, and it's said that their minds match. And Nagarjuna scoots over and offers Kanadeva half of his seat. This is a very trimmed down version of the story, but it's got the essentials. I bring it up in this talk because this bowl of clear water, which in a way was a kind of test for for Kanadeva. Perhaps Nagarjuna wanted to see, is he arriving simply at this temple, this place where he's heard that there's a famous teacher, where he can learn something about Dharma? Is he just arriving at a simply physical place and not knowing how important that physical place is? Or does he know where it is that he's arriving? Does he know what gate is open if he passes through this gate? Does he know what he's in for? I have a kind of idea that must have been what was on Nagarjuna's mind. At least when I'm feeling a little bit more like that. When I'm feeling a little bit more like, oh, of course your heart knows what this is. I imagine that Nagarjuna was putting out this bowl just to encourage Kanadeva. This one seamless, full and round bowl of clear water, to let him know, of course, this is the gate. Welcome. It's interesting that in Nagarjuna's meeting with his own teacher, when his teacher came and met him there underneath the dragon tree deep in the woods, Nagarjuna said to him, "Why are you here, eminent monk? Venerable teacher, you've condescended to come here underneath this tree." And his name's escaping my mind right now, his teacher's name. He said, I am not the venerable one. And this sent Nagarjuna into great doubt. He started thinking, is this really a teacher? Is this really someone that I should follow? Does he have a real teaching? And his teacher said to him, "Without speaking, I know what you are thinking. Why think about whether I am true or false? Why not simply cut your hair and follow the way?" Can you see the compassion in that? He wasn't coming as the teacher. He was coming to meet the wise person that was there. He was coming to meet the wise person of Nagarjuna. He was bringing a clear bowl of water. How could Nagarjuna pass through that gate? So this invitation, this receiving, this is the central work of the office of the abbot, to receive in this way, to guide the community by receiving with this clear bowl. So this clear bowl becomes the receiving of the Sangha of each other. That each of you realizes that this mountain is not just a physical location on the crossroads of 22nd and Garfield. It is a physical location, but it's not reducible to physicality. It is that sacred mountain from which the Buddha preaches. It is the sacred mountain of your own heart. And as we all learn to greet each other with this clear and full bowl, quite miraculously, the needle of our own simple self finds a way in where there is no opening at all. There's no obvious entry point into the water other than simply casting the needle in. So it is my vow to set that bowl out for your good, but also for my own. May we take care of it together.